The U.S. Navy has 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, more than every other country on Earth combined. 68 submarines, over 70 destroyers loaded with missiles, around 300 combat ships total. And a single carrier strike group, one carrier plus its escort fleet of destroyers, cruisers, and attack subs, can project air power across 500 miles of ocean. We're throwing that at 8 of the largest navies in history. Different eras, weapons, and doctrines. And the rules? Each navy at its historical peak. No modernizing the ancient fleets. The US gets what it has today. Let's go. Carthaginian Empire. Carthage was the dominant naval power in the Western Mediterranean for 2 centuries. At peak strength, they fielded around 350 quinqueremes, massive oar-driven warships built on a Phoenician tradition that predated Rome by hundreds of years. Their sailors were professionals. Their shipyards could build warships faster than almost anyone in the ancient world. The quinquereme was the cutting edge of its era. 5 banks of oarsmen driving a bronze ram at the waterline, crewed to shear off enemy oars before closing for the kill. It took Rome copying a wrecked Carthaginian hull just to build a navy worth fighting. Against the US Navy, none of it matters. One Arleigh Burke destroyer carries surface-to-air missiles, a 5-inch gun firing 20 rounds a minute, and Tomahawk cruise missiles with a 1,000-mile range. One carrier wing has 70-plus aircraft. The entire Carthaginian fleet is airborne ash before a single ram gets within 5 miles of anything American. US Navy wins 99%. Persia. Xerxes crossed into Greece in 480 BC with somewhere between 60 and 1,200 warships. Ancient sources say 1,207. Modern historians lean towards 600 to 800. Either way, it was the largest fleet the ancient world had ever assembled. The problem Xerxes ran into at Salamis is the same problem he'd face here. A Greek fleet of 371 ships baited him into a narrow strait where his numbers became a liability. Ships couldn't maneuver. Formations collapsed, and 300 Persian vessels went down to 40 Greek losses. The US Navy doesn't need a strait. A Virginia-class submarine can launch 40 Tomahawk missiles from 50 feet underwater without ever surfacing. The carrier air wing is in the air before the Persian fleet even has a direction to row. Nothing in Xerxes' arsenal tracks a radar signature, intercepts a jet, or survives a cruise missile. More ships just means more to sink. US Navy wins 99%. Roman Republic. Rome was not a natural naval power. They built their first real warships in 60 days by reverse engineering a wrecked Carthaginian hull, then invented the corvus, a spiked boarding bridge that dropped onto enemy ships, specifically because they couldn't beat Carthage at seamanship. So they turned every naval battle into a land battle instead. It worked. Rome eventually eliminated Mediterranean piracy so completely they controlled every major sea lane. Their edge was never ship design. It was relentlessness. They lost entire fleets to storms and rebuilt within months, every time. Same technology gap as Carthage. What makes Rome interesting is the mindset. No setback stopped them from rebuilding. In a war of attrition where the US ran low on munitions, Rome would just keep sending ships until the math changed. A modern strike ends this fast. US Navy wins 99%. Byzantine Empire. Greek fire changes everything here. Not the outcome, but the psychology. The Byzantines ran droman warships with bronze siphons mounted on the prow that fired a petroleum-based incendiary that burned on water and couldn't be put out with water. It could be sprayed, thrown in grenades, or launched by hand. The formula died with the empire in 1453. Nobody's been able to fully replicate it since. In 717 AD, an Arab armada of over 1,800 ships attacked Constantinople. Greek fire wiped it out. The Byzantines held naval supremacy in the Mediterranean for 5 centuries on the back of that weapon. None of it touches a radar-guided harpoon missile. But if a US crew somehow ended up in close quarters against a Byzantine fleet in confined waters with systems down, Greek fire is genuinely terrifying in a way that oars and rams just aren't. Still, not close. US Navy wins 98%. Ottoman Empire. At Lepanto in 1571, the Ottomans fielded 272 warships with 50,000 sailors and 750 guns. They were the dominant Mediterranean power of the age, raiding coastlines from Italy to Spain and taking thousands into slavery. Pope Pius V had to beg, negotiate, and threaten to pull together the Holy League that finally stopped them. The League barely won, and only by deploying Venetian galleasses, enormous artillery ships that broke the Ottoman formation before the fighting even started. Without those 6 ships, Lepanto probably goes the other way. What makes the Ottomans genuinely impressive isn't Lepanto, it's what happened after. They rebuilt to 250 ships within 6 months, added their own galleasses, and reasserted naval control of the Eastern Mediterranean. A fleet of that size, destroyed in an afternoon, replaced within months. In 1571, terrifying. In modern terms, no radar, no anti-aircraft capability, nothing reaching over the horizon. The naval engagement ends fast. The real complication is political. You can sink every one of these ships and still not touch Ottoman land power, which in 1571 ran from Budapest to Basra. US Navy wins 98%. British Royal Navy. The first navy here that gives you genuine pause. Not because it can win, it can't, but because this was the most powerful naval institution in human history before the 20th century. At its Napoleonic peak, the Royal Navy deployed over 120 ships of the line, backed by more than 600 active warships of all classes. It blockaded entire continents. At Trafalgar, it defeated the combined Franco-Spanish fleet 27 ships to 33 without losing a single vessel. A first-rate ship of the line carried 100 guns across 3 decks. Nothing in their era came close. The problem is range. A carrier air wing engages targets 500 miles out. Tomahawks reach beyond 1,000. A ship of the line needs to be within half a mile to do any damage. The British can never close that gap. There's no version of this where sailing ships catch a carrier strike group that doesn't want to be caught. Their only real hope is thick fog, a total failure of American navigation, and stumbling into point-blank range before anyone reacts. Possible? Unlikely. US Navy wins 97%. Imperial Japan. Now we're talking. In December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy had 10 battleships, 12 aircraft carriers, 18 heavy cruisers, 111 destroyers, and 68 fleet submarines. Their naval air arm included over 600 frontline combat aircraft, pairing torpedo bombers with the legendary Zero fighter. 6 of those carriers hit Pearl Harbor and found every target they aimed at. The Yamato was the largest battleship ever built, 72,000 tons, carrying 18-inch guns. The biggest ever put to sea. The Long Lance torpedo was faster and longer range than anything the Americans had. Japan had radar. Inferior radar, but radar. In a parallel universe where Japan keeps developing for another 80 years, this is a real fight. In this one, the US Navy's ship-based Spy-6 radar tracks ballistic missiles through space. FA-18 Super Hornets fly at altitudes Zeros can't reach. Nuclear submarines shadow the Japanese fleet from the moment it leaves port. Japan never locates the carrier strike group before the strikes start, but Japan would do more damage than anyone else on this list. 68 fleet submarines hunting in confined Pacific waters, that's a threat you actually have to take seriously. US Navy wins 90%. Soviet Union, the hardest matchup on this list. At its 1990 peak, the Soviet Navy had 1,057 ships, including 275 submarines. Among those, 63 ballistic missile submarines, 72 cruise missile submarines, and 68 nuclear attack submarines. Their surface fleet ran 3 battle cruisers, 30 cruisers, and 113 frigates. Every bit of it was designed around a single mission, killing American carrier strike groups. Their P-700 Granite missile, NATO called it Shipwreck, carried a 1,650-pound warhead at Mach 1.6, out to about 340 miles. Oscar-class submarines carry 24 of them each. Soviet doctrine called for coordinated saturation salvos, Fire enough missiles simultaneously that the math overwhelms point defense systems. They didn't need all of them to get through. They just needed some. The US Navy wins this. American submarines, electronic warfare, and fleet air defense are broadly better. But the Soviets are the only force in history who actually built a credible plan for sinking a carrier strike group. One granite hit on a carrier is catastrophic. They had enough submarines to run the math in their favor. US Navy wins 75%. And could US Marines defeat history's greatest armies? That's on your screen right now. Thanks for watching.